Hi everyone. This week's lessons are going to go over how to properly care for babies. This is what I would normally teach and deliver to you all in class to prepare you to take home the Real Care babies. Unfortunately, we won't be able to take home the babies, as if we do go back to school, there wouldn't be enough time for everyone to have a chance and take them home. So this week, there will be a series of lessons for you to view. Some will be recorded like this one, and some may not, and you'll just have to view a few set of slides. To replace taking home the babies, there is a project that you will complete this week in order to assess how well you would handle certain situations with an infant. I want to first start off with how to cope with crying. Coping with crying is one of the first things you have to learn to do effectively, especially if you did have the Real Care babies and babies of your own in the future. So what do you know? You can go ahead and take the time to pause this recording so you can view these statements and determine if they are true or false. Number 1, babies' heads and bodies are the same proportion as adults. This is false. Typically, babies' heads and bodies are way out of proportion. Their heads may be bigger than the rest of their bodies, but as they grow, they will even out and get into the same proportion as we are as adults. Number 2, babies cry an average of 30 minutes a day. This is false. 30 minutes a day is actually on the low end of a baby crying. However, on average, babies will cry about 1 to 2 hours a day. Number 3, more serious injuries are caused by shaking a baby than if a baby fell from a distance of 10 feet. This is true. We will talk a little bit more about shaken baby syndrome at a later lesson. Number 4, shaking a baby once can cause death. This is also true. Again, more info to come on that. Number 5, the medical cost for a baby that is shaken can be thousands of dollars. This is actually false because it is a lot more than that. It can be hundreds of thousands of dollars due to the life-saving interventions that would need to occur in order to save that baby's life. Number 6, if you have tried everything and your baby is still crying, it's okay to leave the baby in the crib for a few minutes. This is true. If you're really overwhelmed and stressed, as long as the baby is in a safe spot away from any hazards, it is okay to leave for a few minutes to, again, regain composure, take a deep breath so you can calmly handle the baby to help get it to stop crying. So what do babies do naturally? They eat, sleep, poop, and ultimately cry. Here in this graph, you'll see the length of time a baby can cry within a 24-hour period. So a low crier would cry for about 20 to 30 minutes a day, average 1 to 2 hours a day, high crier 5 to 6 hours a day. One thing that you'll also see in this graph is that the peak of crying occurs at 2 months and then will slowly decline after that because parents will adjust and learn what it takes to soothe their baby so they stop crying. The period of purple crying. So purple does stand for a certain acronym, but it's really a way to understand why your baby cries and just to gain some knowledge around crying in general. So P, peak of crying, I had mentioned, occurs in the second month of life, and then it'll slowly decline after that. U, unexpected. Crying can come and go. A lot of times you may not know why, despite trying to change, feed, rock, or soothe the baby, but sometimes babies just cry to cry. R, resist soothing. The baby may not stop crying no matter what you try. Again, that's really natural because babies just cry to let out emotion. You'll just have to try different things to soothe them, but it's okay if all that you try doesn't work. That's very natural, and eventually they will stop crying. P, pain-like face. A baby can look like they are in pain even when they're not. It's hard for us to understand what the baby is feeling, and the only way that they can express that is through some facial expressions. However, with their pain-like face, sometimes they may not be in pain, and that's nothing to worry about. L, long-lasting. Crying can last as much as 5 hours a day, sometimes more. Again, it kind of just depends on what's going on with the baby, but again, an average of 5 hours per day of crying is completely normal. E for evening, the baby may cry more in the late afternoon or early evenings because they're trying to get used to a certain schedule and routine. So a lot of that crying you'll see, especially at night, which is why a lot of new parents anyway, don't get a lot of sleep at night because that's when the baby learns to cry. Just know that the word period means that the crying has a beginning and an end. This is just a period of time, especially within those first 2 months. And a lot of this parents will learn to adjust and cope with, especially once they get the handle on parenting. So why should caregivers and parents respond to an infant crying? It is definitely an important part of emotional nurturing. When you do respond to a baby crying, it teaches the baby that they can trust and bond with you, versus if you don't respond to their crying, when they grow up, they may not be able to trust you because you're not taking care of some of their basic needs. So always respond to crying. I know, especially when you're tired or when parents are tired, sometimes they may ignore the crying, but eventually they'll have to attend to the baby and give them what they need. So there are 4 basic cries: the hungry cry, cry of pain, the bored or grumbling cry, and the angry cry. Parents will eventually be able to differentiate between these different types of cries, just so they know how to respond to their crying baby. Same thing with the Real Care babies. A lot of students were able to pick up on the different patterns and the sounds of the cries, so they know exactly what to do. We're not going to watch this video right now. However, I will include a copy of these slides so you can go back and view these videos. I would highly recommend that you do view these videos just so you can get an understanding of crying, but I will also try to post these as well if it's easier. So what if you couldn't talk? So as I mentioned, babies don't talk, and the way that they can communicate with caregivers and parents is really because of crying. So when they are crying, it's because they're hungry. They have to be changed. Maybe they're uncomfortable. So just know that crying is really the only form of communication from babies, because they obviously can't talk at this point in time. If a baby is sick or uncomfortable, it can be due to a variety of things. They may have allergies, they may be teething, so it's just really painful in their gum areas. And sometimes they just may have issues with their ears. You know, babies tend to get ear infections a lot when they're younger, but it could be a variety of things that is making a baby uncomfortable. Colic, if you haven't heard of colic, is really due to a lot of stomach problems. So babies may be in pain because of colic. You'll notice this when babies pull legs up to their stomach, but they could have gas just due to the type of diet that the mother has, and that kind of relays to the baby through breastfeeding. So they often recommend that if you're breastfeeding, to avoid onions, garlic, broccoli, anything that would make a normal person pretty gassy, because those are pretty gassy foods. Sometimes babies will be lactose intolerant. They'll definitely have to check with doctors on that to see what alternatives there are to formula. But colic does grow out of babies by 3 to 4 months, just because babies will slowly move into solid foods, and they'll make more movements, which will make their digestive systems a lot more consistent. So the 5 S's by Dr. Harvey Karp. So when a baby is crying, you always want to try these 5 S's to try to soothe the baby. And trust me, these do work. I've tried them on my nephews, and when I try all of these, or at least one of these, they more often than not stop crying. So the first S is to swaddle. Tight swaddling provides the continuous touching and support that the baby experience while they are in their mother's womb. So it's really just wrapping them up in a blanket. I know there are some swaddling like types of clothing that make it a little bit easier to swaddle, but this is something that nurses would teach you, or again, there are certain pieces of clothing that make swaddling easy. Next is side position. If you place your baby on the side or stomach, it'll aid in their digestion and help provide reassuring support for the baby. So it's just more of a comfortable position for the baby that soothes them. Swinging or swaying. So if you do swing or sway the baby, it kind of mimics the motions that they experience when they're in the mother's womb. So again, that's something that kind of eases them and calms them down. Sucking on a pacifier, or just sucking in general, it definitely has effects deep within the nervous system, and it triggers calming reflexes that help release natural chemicals within the brain. So if they are, sucking on a bottle or they're being fed, that will soothe them. If they're sucking on a pacifier, that will soothe them. And later on, when kids start sucking on their thumbs, that also provides a sense of calmness. Shushing or white noise. This again imitates noises that they may have heard within the womb. So a lot of times with my nephews, just in their ear, I just may make a shushing noise, just like shh, 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 and that would normally calm them down. But some parents often use white noise machines as well in order to mimic those sounds, just so it's not as exhausting for parents. I'll post this video as well. I think that'll probably be easier for you all to do, but this dad tries all of the 5 S's and this baby calms down right away. So how to cope with crying for you as a caregiver or parent, you definitely want to take deep breaths, try to say the alphabet, take a warm bath, exercise, just anything that you would normally do to de-stress. It's the same thing with a baby because crying can get very annoying at times, and sometimes it does cause a sense of worry as well because you don't want to hear a baby crying. Sometimes it makes you feel sad when people are crying. It's the same thing with babies, but you want to try all the coping mechanisms that you would do when you're stressed to help you cope with that as well. Just a few reminders is that it is the baby's job to cry. It's your job to cope with the crying. So again, using any methods that you would know, trying the 5 S's, and just being knowledgeable about why babies cry will help you cope more effectively overall. Just know that you can always put the baby in a safe place and leave the room if you are becoming overwhelmed or overly stressed. Maybe give the baby to someone else for a short amount of time just so you can recoup. And one important last thing that I will leave you on for this presentation is just know that an infant has never died from crying too much. Babies will cry for long amounts of time, but it's ultimately not going to kill them. A lot of times, there may be underlying conditions with the baby, which is why that they're crying. However, if it gets too much, it's always something that you can consult with a doctor about, but just be rest assured that nothing will happen to a baby if you leave them crying.